Hello and welcome everyone to the Inclusionary Practice Technical Assistance Network, learning from inclusion work in Washington State, presented by Zach Smith. My name is Thomas Veloso. I'm a program support specialist with SIP, and I'll be the moderator for this breakout session, and I'll pass it to Sarah, who will be my co-moderator.
Hi, my name's Sarah Bleak. I'm a program support specialist based in El Dorado County. I'm working for the Supportive Innovative Practices. Thanks for having me.
And just letting everyone know that this session will be recorded, and it'll also be available on the conference agenda webpage for a month. Closed captioning is also available if you click on the CC button that you'll find at the bottom right of your screen. And Spanish translation is available if you click on the interpretation icon, which is in the same area. ASL interpreters will be here and they'll be spotlighted during the presentation. Also, just keep in mind to keep your volume muted to avoid any background distractions. And also feel free to use the chat and engage with one another, engage with the presenter, engage with us. And then if possible, we'd love if you guys can keep your camera on so that we can see your faces and we can interact with you and engage with you as much as possible. And with that, Zach, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to you.
All right. Thanks, Thomas. Super duper excited to be here. Longtime friend of SIP, way back even in the old school days, like 2015 and stuff like that when I was working for a district here in California. So, yeah, huge fan and excited to be here. Today's session, in case you don't know where you are, we're talking about the Technical Assistance Network. And it's something that we've been working on in partnership with the Washington Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction out there. And so thanks, Carmen. I'm a huge fan of you all too. Yeah, we're just going to sort of tell the story of how a different state is working in this space of inclusion type work, inclusion and innovation. And then along the way, hopefully find some application to stuff we're doing in California. So I'm Zach, Senior Project Director with WestEd. I do all stuff related to innovation and inclusion across federal, state, and local levels. I love UDL and do a lot of work with it, work on communities of practice, and then sort of just general special education related stuff. And then I'm based in Fresno, California. And I used to work in a district called Sanger Unified out here many years ago. And yeah, so that's a bit about me. Hey, Claudia, hopefully you might be in Fresno with me. Either way, so jump right in. The goal here is to keep it interactive, keep it light, and have some fun while learning stuff along the way. And so here we go. So really want you to discover or understand what the Inclusionary Practices Technical Assistance Network is, which is a mouthful, so we just call it the IPTN. And really understand what Washington's working to do and why, and then take that understanding and think about the implications of what could be applied in California. So here are some success criteria for this goal. One is you just understand like the general elevator pitch of what the IPTN is. Two, you get a chance to engage in dialogue and some activities that allow us to sort of put ourselves in the place of the IPTN. And then three, you've identified some next steps or some implications that can connect new ideas to your work, possibly from the work we're doing in Washington. So I do want this to be super duper interactive and to connect with you. So I want to know a bit about why you're in the room. What brings you into the space? What would make you feel successful today in our 84 minutes or so? And yeah, so if you want to come off mute and share, or if you want to put it in the chat, that's great. But what would make today really helpful for you? Okay, so we're just going to get to that elevator pitch of the IPTN. And I want to give you enough of the context here so that you can get a sense of how to engage in an activity around the IPTN to really learn what it's about. So let's jump into that. Here's the challenge. We focus on the inclusion of students with an IEP. We focused with, like I said, the Washington Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. We're in Washington State, though obviously I live in California. With WestEd, we have team members all over the country. But when we're working with Washington State, we're working in a design team where it's basically like Washington, the cohort of staff members from the department, and WestEd. And together we make up the design team that sort of leads this work for the state and sort of helps these different players organize around the state. And really what we're trying to do is increase inclusion for all students, especially students who are Black and have an IEP, or students who have an intellectual or developmental delay. So when we talk about students with more complex needs, especially when we're talking about students with IDD, that is the focus of our work. And so Washington's a little bit different than other states in that it's called our unapologetic aim. We really need to see, we've seen 1.7% growth in access for all students to LRE1. And when we looked at the data in a disaggregated way, we saw that Black students were only growing at 1.2%. And then, like it says here, students with IDD were only growing at 0.2% in terms of their access to general education. And that was something that was really keeping the department up at night. And so rather than just focus on all, we said, we're going to focus on these two groups of students in the state and really think through the implications of if they were included more successfully, how would the system as a whole get better? And Araceli, I think if Thomas or Sarah, would you share the link to the slides again, just for... All right, so again, here's some more data related to that. So again, average rate of change for students with disabilities across the state was 1.7, Black students 1.2. Students with intellectual disabilities was 0.2. We also we got hit with the argument that, well, what happens if we disaggregate and look at, other disability categories? It can't just be about Black students in the case of race. And when we pulled out for different sort of categories, we still saw that Black students, even when we accounted for the different categories, were lagging behind their peers. And so, we being Washington and our work with Washington, really felt like it was important for us to do something about it. That then led us to the aim statement. So, we've taken an improvement science model where we set an aim and then set a series of metrics related to that aim's improvement. And then we break down through root cause, what are the drivers around why things are the way they are. So in the case of Washington, this is what we put up, this is what we talk about, this is what we ground the entire state in as sort of the focus and source of the work. And the aim, again, is the driver that we always come back to. And you can see that inclusion of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities and Black students with disabilities as our focus and purpose within the state. So this is, as you can imagine, raise some eyebrows in some cases. Again, this is driven by the department here. And it's rooted in data in that we're seeing these two populations consistently not grow in their rates of inclusion. So when we pull all the numbers out again, about 5 in 10 Black students with disabilities are included 80% or more of the day. And in comparison, about 7 of 10 of white students are included at 80% of their day. And then when we looked at students with intellectual and developmental delays, only 3 of 100 of those students were included, which again, we're not making any sort of assertions around like, removing the continuum of placement or anything like that. The state of Washington just isn't content with it being 3 out of 100 being included in ways like this. So that was really the challenge. Again, trying to go slow to go fast here. That was what we worked to solve, or what we're working to solve in the state. Are there any questions pertaining to the challenge and the why around sort of building the network? I'll get into the details of how we built it, but that's what we're really trying to solve. So now this is the sort of focus, how we do the work in Washington. So like we said, our goal, oh, thanks, Kayla. So what frameworks did the group use when designing the network? Improvement science was the primary framework because it took a systemic look at what's going on with the system and allowed us to sort of do some root cause analysis. Um, and then otherwise, sort of within that improvement science framework, we're engaged in communities of practice, and I'll show you what that is in a minute, to help move the different drivers that were identified as like challenge points or pain points related to why things are the way they are. So we can get a little bit deeper into it, but that improvement science framework is probably the biggest one that we use. So, and in that end, we set an aim statement per improvement science, and then we sort of set goal metrics, and we wanted to see overall growth continue to be at or better than what we've had. We want growth for Black students with an IEP to be at 4% per year, and growth for students with developmental or intellectual or developmental delays being at 6%. So we've set this as a goal. Here's another way of looking at it. Here's another way of looking at it too. And then this is what we're rallying everyone around. Okay, we're paying deep and close attention to these metrics. And the reason why we're focused on, expediting the growth of Black students with an IEP or students with intellectual or developmental disabilities is we're trying to close this gap here. So, right now we're about right here in the space. And we know that if we hit these different metrics, we've seen growth. By the way, this is an old slide, but we've seen growth between last year and this year. It's not at the rates that we wanted, but we are seeing improvements. But you can see we're trying to close the gap. And even with students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, them having a high rate of change is because they have such a big gap. There's such a humongous gap between these students and other student populations across the state. So that then sort of lays out the net health. And this is, I think, helpful when thinking about a big state like California, because there are a lot of players. So we have the IPTN members. These are anyone funded through the state who is offering tools and guidance to include or to improve inclusionary students. So if, let's say, in this case, like we have a SIP, we have a CECL, we have an open access, we have a county offices, we have SELPAs in California. In Washington, we have those same versions. You have the Herring Center, which is the Inclusionary Practices Technical Assistance Project. We have the sort of UW that also is connected to the Herring Center. Ties is involved in part of this mix. So we have these different partners that get money from the state to do stuff. The state is now saying the stuff that you do, you need to be able to trace a through line to how it's going to improve our aim. So those are the members. They're actually paid to be in the network. Then we have an advisory. So this is a steering committee composed of people who are proximal to the focus students or focus populations in the AIM, and who have sort of considerable, sphere of influence within the state to understand the problem. So we have school board members, we have county, we would say AESDs, but those are like county office leads. We have, the director, some directors at the state level in general curriculum, sort of leading the direction and advising the network. In the network, we also have partner districts. Those districts are ones who the state has identified as needing a bit of extra help, or for whom their data is sort of being flagged as, hey, we need to make some changes here for these populations. And we'll give you a little bit of dollars to help with making those changes, as long as you sort of communicate what you're learning along the way and how we might scale these changes that you're making. And then we have collaborators. So these are folks that are outside of any of these other entities, but want to know what's going on with the network. That's sort of how they work. So, and then again, this is our improvement science frame. So we did root cause analysis as to why things are the way they are related to the aim. And then when we did root cause, we clustered those causes around different systemic drivers. So students with disabilities, Black students with disabilities and students with IDD, we see there being structural sort of infrastructure around data that's contributing to the problem. Like districts don't see the problem because they don't have the ability to disaggregate. So we don't know that, these populations, we don't know how they're doing in our district because the data doesn't allow us to see them. Resources, we're seeing resources get spent towards more self-contained classrooms or one-on-ones versus towards infrastructure that would support these populations having inclusive settings. We're seeing like folks aren't being trained in how to include these populations or network with those that focus on those populations in the state. And so we're trying to sort of think through the training mechanisms we're using. Shared ownership. This is just a simple way of saying like a problem, a driver here is that special education and general education don't talk to each other as often in Washington, which is, that never happens in California, but I'm kidding. Clearly it happens everywhere. But, this idea of how do we de-silo, how do we create shared ownership for these populations and what sort of infrastructure is needed? Family and community partnerships. One, how are we elevating to families this challenge that our state is facing, and then what we're doing with it, and then how do we gather input from them in order to partner with us to make this change. And then the final driver was we're losing educators. So the historians or the folks that are sort of driving best practice, we don't always have the ability to keep them in our state or keep them in the roles that will help us move the needle here, and we need to figure it out. So these are then the drivers that we're sort of organizing ourselves around, and each IPTN member is within their sphere of influence. We sort of tag them into a driver. So we have like one of the members is working on the statewide data system. You better believe we have representation of that group in the data-driven strategy. Other members are tied specifically to technical assistance. The Herring Center, for example, which does the Inclusive Practices Project, that's where the demo sites come from. If anyone's familiar with the state of Washington, they really help us in understanding what shared ownership looks like, because they've created schools that are being more inclusive and they kind of know what it takes. So each one of these members sort of funnels into these different drivers. Key differences you've noticed between this work and what you've seen in California. I think Shamron, to your question, in Washington, I think they're doing a good job from the top down of getting people organized around one thing. So like, it's crystal clear what they're focused on in the state. And to those folks that are like, well, LRE isn't the only thing, the state's like, yeah, sure. LRE is just an indicator. You need to help us understand what meaningful LRE, meaningful inclusion looks like, and that's part of why we hired you. So things like UDL, things like MTSS, we need to know what, this broad brushstroke of LRE needs to look like with the sort of measures around it. And so I think they've done a good job of being able to keep the state focused across the different layers. I also think their demo sites, living in California and being around, when demo sites started way back in the 2010s, I like the way they do it in that it's very honest with what, I don't know how to say it. Like if you've been to Ruby Bridges, that school, it's very honest with where we are and where we're going. And they're really looking to sort of listen to not just share their story, but listen to the story of those that visit and be able to sort of think through and problem solve how ways that they can, someone else's story, someone else's context could sort of be supported based on their learning. So yeah, so demo sites, it's not directly us, it's the Herring Center, who is one of those, members that's paid by the state. And so they have a mechanism where you have to sort of meet a series of criteria. Inclusion obviously is a big one. And then they have demo sites all around the state. So I'll find the website there. It's a really fun and cool sign up system where you can basically they put stars all over the state in a visual, like an infographic or sort of a data viz thing. You can click on that star based on which which school is close to you, and you can sign up to visit the school. Let's see. All right, so I promise we're getting there. The way we do the way we do our technical assistance, or the way the network works, is we have universal stuff, things that we do with all of our members. Think of these as like gatherings that happen strategically and virtually throughout the year, where we all make sure that we're rallied around what this is about. That's where we did our root cause identification, and where we sort of share out what the communities of practice are doing. We then have the members. So again, these are the folks that are paid by the state, the TA providers, cluster together in these communities of practice, and they're sort of doing deep dives around recommendations and key learnings in order that they would help create TA that's targeted for districts around improving these outcomes that have been defined within the aim. And then we have intensive TA, where we meet with each of these state-funded providers. And then also at this point, we meet with district leads who are in the network to help them continue to make progress on their local levels. So together, this is sort of how the network functions within the TA. Each of these helps equip the state players to sort of see, both what we're trying to do globally at the state level, but then also to know that there is within their sphere things that they can change or do differently related to the aim. So we kind of have this zoom out, zoom in model. So the advisory leads the IPTN members and leads us, the design team. That's just what we figured out we'd call ourselves. That's WestEd and OSBI, and sort of help us know where to go. Collaborators are there. They, again, are giving impact and input. And then eventually what we've been doing, and this is already happening along the way, is that the members who are paid by the state to provide TA are doing so in a coordinated way around the aim, and the TA is reaching the districts. Well, I'm just going to say this. It was fabulous to sort of get a chance to connect with you. Our goal for today was really for you to understand a bit more about what the state of Washington's doing in regard to inclusion, inclusive practices, and innovation. I know that, at least for me, it feels like we're in a bit of a common moment where it was like, we could go deeper, and I want to go deeper. So if you do have questions or concerns, or want to just talk more, know that I will reply back to your emails to me. So I'll drop my email into the Zoom chat and then pass it back to you so that you get us out on time.
Thank you so much, Zach, and to everyone in attendance. Thank you for your commitment to supporting students with disabilities and their families. Our mission here at SIP is to accelerate education through innovation, include and improve outcomes for all students. And I feel like your presentation and activity were a perfect example of just that focus. Today's slides and resources from the presentation are available in the session description on the VFAIR's agenda page. If you have questions, visit the information booth. You might find your answer there. Please stick around and join us for what's coming up next. We have a documentary, the 17% by Colette DeVito. You can also connect with others in our social lounge. Feel free to head over to our photo booth and take a selfie. and tag us at SIPCon 2025 in any social media posts. It's been great to connect with you all. Thank you once again, Zach. Bye for now.